Today on episode 60, we are talking about email marketing, but a little bit further than that, we're talking about how you can use segues in your email marketing. Not sure what a segue is? Well, you better tune in for this episode and my really special guest I've got coming on. Hey, welcome to the Small Business Made Simple podcast, brought to you by socialmediaandmarketing.com.au. Being in business is never easy, but it can be simple, or at least simpler. Join me, your host Jen Donovan, every week where we focus on marketing, social media, and working towards simplifying your business. You with me? Let's do this.
Gonna dream it big, 'cause someone out there listening. Everyone's got a voice to give, and it's time I heard you whistling, 'cause there's no point at all, in dreaming small.
Hey there, my podcast family. Welcome to episode 60 of the Small Business Made Simple podcast. Thank you, as always, for lending me your ears today. I sincerely appreciate you making me one of your choices, considering how many you actually have out there to listen to. If you're a first-time listener, then hey, super welcome to you. I'm so pleased to have you here. I am your host, Jen Donovan, and it's my job via this podcast and social media and absolutely everything else I actually do to make your business life just a wee bit simpler. Business can be really lonely and hard and complicated, and it's hardly ever easy, but it definitely should be simple or just a little bit simpler. So that is my commitment to you here on the Small Business Made Simple podcast. One of the ways that I can help make your life simpler is if you come and join my Facebook group, Like-Minded Business Owners. You can hop in there, ask questions, collaborate with other people in the group, network, all of that with people just like you. And that's why it's called the Like-Minded Business Owners group. You can find it on Facebook by simply searching Like-Minded Business Owners, or you can come to the show notes and get the link there. I'm just a wee bit excited for the episode today, but first, before I get into that, I just wondered, have you downloaded my ever so popular free ebook, 108 Social Media Content Creation Ideas? No? Well, if you're struggling with social media and content creation and ideas, then this free ebook is definitely something you would love to get your hands on. Simply head to www.108social.com.au and download it from there. If you get it and read it and print it out and hang it up and look at it all the time, I promise you it will change your life, or at least your social media challenges part of your life. So again, www.108social.com.au. Okay, so today we are actually talking about email marketing and segues. If you aren't quite sure what a segue is, well, it's kind of like telling a story, but then you flip it and you relate it to the point you're trying to make in the email. If you are on my list, you have seen me attempt to do this. And last week you would have received my email that was all about Baby Shark. Google Baby Shark, you will hate me forever. But it was my attempt at using a segue to talk about the podcast episode that was last week. Anyway, I'm going to leave it for my guests to explain to you a little bit more about what segues are and how to use them in your email marketing. But I am a little bit excited, and possibly a little bit more excited than usual, because I do love email marketing. But guess what? The guest I have on today is my first international guest. Yay! I am going international. Little tiny happy dance happening here for me right now. Or at least this episode's going international. I have stalked and kindly stalked in a marketing type of way Brenna for a couple of years now. I love what she does, and I think we started business, or in the businesses we are in now, at a very similar time, and that's the way it looked on social media anyway. So it's always fun to watch other people who are on the same journey as you in relatively the same amount of time as you. I actually admitted to her in her group that I had actually been stalking her for a little while, and we connected a few times on Instagram, but she actually sent me a DM on Instagram and said, hey, would I be able to come onto your podcast? And I was like, yeah, I think methinks that's a good idea. So a bit of a side note, this and that is just really why I love social media, where complete strangers can become your friends and we can do these sorts of things across many, many oceans. So Brenna has the Social Rescue and she's all about email copy. She's the co-creator of the Content Bar, which she'll talk to you a little bit about today. And her passion is basically just making email writing or writing emails easy peasy. And the rest, you know what? I'll let her tell you all about that. But here goes my first international guest. Help me welcome Brenna to the podcast. Thank you so much, Brenna, for coming on the podcast today. I'm so excited to have my first international guest. And not only that, as I said before in my intro, that, you know, I've been stalking you for a little while. So I was a little bit excited when you reached out to come on the podcast. But for those people who don't know you, could you perhaps give us a little bit of a background on who you are and what you do?
Yes. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited. We're both the first time for our international podcast for both of us. So thank you so much. I'm very excited. And believe me, I've been telling everyone on social that I'm on an international podcast. So I've gone international, everyone. No, I'm just joking. But my name is Brenna McGowan. I am the owner of the Social Rescue, and I'm also co-creator of the Content Bar. And it's kind of a long journey. I always say I'll give you the Cliff Notes version, right? Because I think there's a lot of, we kind of weave in and out in life of how we get to certain places. But long story short, I was a stay-at-home mom, and I decided when my kids went back to school in about 2011-ish to start going back to work part-time from home. And I did blogging and social media and email marketing. And I also was working for a company, and long story short, they pulled back on my hours. And I had this crazy thought, like, why don't I do social media for other people? It didn't I knew so little about it on this level that I didn't realize there's this huge world out there. And I think it was a good thing, right? I think I would have been really intimidated had I not realized. So in April 2018, I just kind of threw myself out there and said I was starting this business and got clients immediately. The only problem is that I kind of hated doing social media management, which is what I started in. And I think it was a blessing though, because I was able to take the parts of my business that I really loved and pivot. And what I realized is that I really loved copy, and even more so, I loved email copy. And interestingly enough, Instagram captions, social media captions to me are a lot like email copy is. So I kind of dove headfirst into email copy, and then to go even another pivot by doing that and niching down. I guess it was probably spring of last year, I had someone that I knew, not even like a friend, reach out to me over Instagram and ask me if I might be interested in starting a membership with them. And that's how we created the Content Bar. And that's a monthly membership where we offer content support and help for people. And we really focus on imagery and copy. It's dual focus. So that's kind of the long, windy path on how I got here. So
yeah, certainly. And anyone who is on Instagram, you know, have a look up the Social Rescue and you will see exactly what Brenna's talking about as far as imagery goes. Your imagery is just beautiful and very enviable, I must say.
Well, thank you so much. And I think that's kind of the fun part of why I love Instagram is I think I have a good eye for things, even though I'm not necessarily someone who likes to spend a lot of time creating on the imagery side or taking pictures. So I'm able to kind of cultivate and work, use inside the Content Bar. We have stock images. So I'm able to take, a mixture of my own images on top of stock images with some professional images and kind of create this fun, unique grid based on all the resources we have out there.
Yeah, absolutely. But of course, that's not why I asked you to come on today. I asked you to come on because I absolutely love your copy. And I suppose it was when, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think recently you've released a free ebook about segues. And it was kind of like, I love the way you do that through your own email list. So I wanted you to come on and have a bit of a chat to my audience, all about copy, but about segues as well. But I guess my first question is certainly, how do you write engaging copy? Because lots of people write copy but not engaging copy, and there's very much a big difference. Have you got a particular formula or a particular tip around how you write engaging copy?
Well, I think there's a few things, and sometimes we don't realize it's not even the words we say necessarily, but how we position our words. So I would say the first thing, and I say this probably on every podcast interview I've done forever, is simple steps like breaking up your text in your copy, like really making sure on Instagram or emails that you're only using 1 or 2 sentences. It instantly is more engaging to have copy, especially online where we're bombarded constantly with tons of, with tons of messaging where it's really easy to read and skim. So that's one thing you can do right now is simply start using only 1 or 2 sentences, 3 at the very most, when it comes to writing your copy. Making sure that you're speaking to one person is instantly more engaging for the reader. When you feel like when you're only talking to one person, you start to have a conversation, and it makes a difference in how engaging it is. Being very conversational and personable. So writing the way that you would talk. I think we have to step away from all of the formalities and I pretty much unlearn everything we learned in school besides like basic spelling, and really figure out ways to like talk in the, a great way to do this and to see, it's easy to say that. There's a couple of tips I have on that, which is, simply if you're having trouble doing this, use voice to text and say your captions out loud first and go back and edit them. Going through and looking for places, read it back out loud and look for places that you can add contractions or combine words together. So
what's a contraction?
Contraction is, so instead of saying I am, I'm, or that is that. So a lot of times we, when we're typing these things out, especially if you're old school like me, you're typing out the way you did it when you were in high school or college. So you normally don't type with contractions. So when you go back and read something out loud, you'll instantly find places where you can combine words, which makes it smoother off the tongue, smoother to read. And the other advantage too of just reading your copy back out loud is you usually find errors every time.
Absolutely.
I actually spoke in a different group this morning, and I said, like, the one time I feel like lately I just wrote a sentence and didn't read it back out loud. I switched something in an email and it was completely wrong. And I'm like, when will I ever learn? Like, you have to read things out loud.
Listen to myself. Take my own advice.
Yes, exactly. Especially on emails, like everything else can be edited, but once you send on that email, it's gone, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you were saying about talking to the one person. I think, and trying to write the way you speak, because I find on this podcast, I get people who write to me or send me a message or a DM or something, and they say, "Oh my God, you were talking to me."
Exactly.
It was just like you were talking to me. And so getting that feedback just is kind of like a little tick. It's like, okay, someone feels like I was using their language. So, and it's the same with your copy. Certainly. I love that tip. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that you can do to really have engaging copy is to use descriptive language. So looking for ways to take out, more of a generic adjective like I'm sad or happy, and thinking about what that actually feels like or looks like. Or even to the point where using descriptive, let's say this is the easy one that always comes to my mind. Instead of saying, are you trying to lose weight? You say, are you trying to fit into the jeans you wore in high school? There's such a difference. And when we talk like that, all of a sudden where your brain peak, if you're someone who's in that if you're that ideal client and you hear, oh yeah, I definitely want to wear the jeans I wore in high school. That makes instead of hearing, the same thing that everyone else is saying, like lose weight, it makes a huge difference. So using descriptive language. And then of course, my favorite way of having engaging copy is using lots and lots of story.
Yeah, as in your personal stories?
Yes. So I think you can use a mixture. I think you can use personal stories. I think you can use client stories. You can use stories of things that have happened to your family or your kids that obviously that you feel comfortable sharing. Story, no matter what it is, there's times that you can talk about stories of something that happened to you or happened to someone else. There's story all around us when we really start looking for it. And that's definitely a way to, story has been the way it helps people remember you when we put things into story. So infusing that into your copy for sure.
Yeah. And I suppose that's a really good segue into my next question. And you may have already covered it, but, we live in such a really busy, extremely crowded sort of marketplace. Like, I take my business, for instance, like there's a social media and marketing person out there, probably for nearly every corner of every street in, every part of the world. And so you've got to get traction as an individual to stand out in the marketplace. So, maybe you've already given us the really good tips for doing that, but how does copy help us stand out in such a really busy marketplace?
No, I think it's a great question. And I have answered it to a tiny degree, but I don't think people really realize that copy is the basis of all your messaging. Everything in your business comes back to copy. And sometimes though it's kind of an oversight, right? We're always thinking, what's the picture I need to put up on Instagram? What is my website design going to look like? We don't realize how much our words really count and how much they set us apart from someone who's doing the same thing. And kind of how you talked about when someone says you were talking to me, that's the power of copy, and that's the power of what your copy can do. And that's truly what will make you stand out, is that your words are what makes you different from the next person. And going a little bit deeper than that too, your stories and your words and your copy is the basis of what your personal brand is. It's what builds know, like, and trust. And it can make you what's different compared to someone who's selling the exact same thing. What you're saying and how you're saying it can attract someone directly to you. I think it also defines who you are and lets people know what you're the expert in. People don't realize what a huge advantage of using your copy is, that you can really pinpoint and be able to speak to your ideal client by using it, and using those kind of words and phrases that your ideal client is using is one way that you can definitely stand out. Making sure a lot of times, when we're in a couple of ideas on here is, if you're in a Facebook group and someone asks a question that is in your genre, going through and looking at the answers people are getting and keeping a file of of answers and different documentation of how people answer questions, is infusing that back into your copy, is how you're going to stand out a little bit differently. So many times we try and come up with copy out of our head, and it's truly the language of our customers is what the kind of copy we want to be using, and how we get people to say, hey, you totally spoke to me.
Yeah, definitely. And if anyone takes just one tip from the podcast today with this interview, please take that one. Like, people are always saying to me, I don't know what to post on social media. I've got nothing to post on social media. That tip alone of, watching the way people answer questions and documenting that's your gold. That is your absolute gold as far as, posting on social media goes, talking in the language, and the problems because you've taken notice of what other people have said.
And I think a lot of times too, and I'm even guilty of it, just being in the hustle and bustle,
Yes.
Someone will ask us a question on Instagram or ask us a question in a Facebook, and we throw out an answer, but we don't realize, like, oh, wait, this is a post. This is, an email. This is a blog post. When you're in these Facebook groups that, I love Facebook groups for this, because you can kind of go in and be a troll, right? And figure out, look at what people are saying and asking, and you can go and answer those type of questions in your own own way that's going to make you different. So I agree with you. I think that's something that when you start looking for it now, hopefully that I have constant notes that every time someone asks me a question, I try and be really diligent about going and putting it in my phone or going into a Google Doc and keeping a running list of these type of things. And once, like you said, looking at the answers that people are using and trying to use some of that language as well.
Yeah, I think that is just such an awesome tip. And I think it can really take away that roadblock of I've got nothing to say.
Definitely.
So I did mention just before about your new little ebook that you have that you released not so long ago, which was kind of like the little ping that went off in my head of, oh, I need this lady on my podcast. And it was about segues. I love the way you use segues in your craft, in your emails. Can you tell my audience just a little bit about what a segue is and how you actually use it inside your business? And I guess alternatively, how we can start using it as well.
I definitely, segues are my favorite subject right now. Basically a segue, it's a transition sentence. And it's a sentence in your copy that transitions you from your story to your main point, your sales message, and or your call to action. So once again, I think sometimes we don't recognize it. A lot of times this is what we're pulled to in a story until it's pointed out. But I joke around that, stories, and you'll hear this a lot, stories are a you story. It's kind of this rhetoric that story is out there, but you don't want to tell a story just to tell a story, right? You need a point. My newest joke about it is you don't want to be the person, at a dinner party that everyone runs from because they're just telling story after story and there's no meaning or point, right? Like we all know that person that we want to avoid. We want to tell stories that are meaningful. The way you do this is by using what I call the art of the segue and the art of a stellar segue. And it's kind of not that it's hard to explain, but when you haven't seen it in copy, and that's part of the reason I created this new guide, which is I go through, and I've had the privilege of working alongside top copywriters like Laura Belgray and Chris Orzechowski, who are masters at this. And I have been able to go through in this guide and take their examples of emails, and I have also some for Instagram captions, and really point out where they use segues and where they were going into these transitions. And so what a segue does is it takes you from your story to your main point. So when we're saying we want to use a lot of story, we want to use stories that typically are analogies or metaphors that create parallels or parables. But these don't have to be sophisticated stories. These can be very unsophisticated to some degree, right? They don't have to be, it could be something that's going on in your everyday life. And I was in a group this morning talking, and I firmly believe that using your everyday story is your superpower, because you're telling these funny, interesting, depending on your personality, maybe you're deep and introspective. I kind of go for a little bit of humor in mine, where you're able to take these stories and you're able to draw a point in your business from them. I think the best way to do this would probably be with an example so I can explain how this works. One story that I did not that long ago is I talked about how this is a funny story that comes to mind. The subject line of my story was, please pee on me if this happens to you, or if this happens to me. And, so first of all, I had a really interesting subject line, because you're wondering why in the world is this girl telling me to pee on her? And I
it gets better, guys. Please don't tune out. It does get better.
I know, maybe that wasn't the best example. But long story short, I know now that we're international, do you guys watch Friends in Australia?
Oh my God, every night before I go to bed. I'm not quite sure I should say that on my podcast, but every night before we go to bed, that is one or two episodes. So I knew as soon as I read that line where you were going, because I'm such
Okay,
a
good.
fan.
Well, and that's exactly what it was. So good thing I used the right example here. But it was about the episode where Chandler pees on Monica when she gets a jellyfish sting. And I tied it back to my life where I was on a honeymoon and I got stung by a jellyfish, and how horribly painful it was, and how I would have done anything to relieve the pain. And so my segue here was along the lines of, this is what the content bar is for you. If you feel like creating content for your business and for your social media is super painful, the content bar is essentially what can relieve the pain. And I used a joke about that. So, yeah, it's kind of funny what you can do you can create these funny segues, and there's a million different ways. But basically, I give examples in the guide, but telling a story and then using a transition sentence, like a simple one is, why is this story important? What does this mean to you? And then drawing your conclusion through after you have that like transition sentence and you've told your story.
Absolutely. And what you said before about, it doesn't have to be a sophisticated type of segue or a sophisticated story. One of mine the other day was about anthills. So I was walking along and I was noticing like the ants were really busy, but other anthills were just completely abandoned. So it's just like, so in my head, it was kind of like, so what do you need to reassess and abandon in your world? The ants are obviously like, right, that one's no good. Let's go and build another one, or we'll live over here. So what is it in our business that we need to look at and abandon, go, that's just no good, let's move on to the next thing that's going to work? So that was kind of my segue, just out for a walk, but watching these ants was really intriguing, and bringing it back to that example inside business.
No, I love that. And I think that shows exactly the power. And I think it shows also kind of this mindset shift where we have to, all of a sudden now we're like, oh yeah, I could see how this applies to my business. It almost goes back to maybe some of that creative writing we did in high school, where you start to look for, these parallels that you wouldn't necessarily otherwise. And
of course, that is my exact next question to you, because that's the way my brain works, and clearly that's the way your brain works. But for other people who aren't looking at Facebook groups with that mindset, or aren't looking at the world that they live in that mindset, how do you get people, or how do you start to look at the world a little bit differently to see these stories? Do you have any tips or tricks around how people can really start to look for the stories that they can use?
Yes. And I do think it's one of those things. I think the best way is to learn from others that are doing this well. Shameless plug for myself. I do this every week in my own emails. But I would say, like, once again, going back to some of my favorites, Laura Belgray, Chris Orzakowski, Marisa Corcoran. These are people that are in my segue guide. Linda Perry. These are people that do this all the time. So I think it's partly that you have to learn what it looks like. And then once you learn what it looks like, it becomes a lot more natural. And I think just like anything, the more we see it being done, the more that we can start thinking, oh, okay, this is how it's going. This is how it could apply to me. So I think that I don't think it's one of those things that if you haven't done it before, that it's going to instantly come to you. I think it takes a little bit of practice. And like I said, I think it takes a little bit more being introspective about what's going on in your life and the lessons that we learn that are kind of these, abnormal lessons that we wouldn't learn, otherwise. A long time ago, for some reason, I'm talking about old TV shows today, but, I talked about a Seinfeld episode of what I felt like. And I used the segue of basically that I felt like I was Kramer on one of his episodes. So there's so many different ways to use these, but it's really, really taking the time to learn how other people are doing it. Learning by example, I think, will help you do it for yourself.
Yeah, look, I would have to 100% agree with that. My mentor that I had for many, many years, he was a master at, storytelling and relating it back to, business itself, or, a challenge in a business or something like that. So I suppose after years and years and years of listening, watching, seeing that, I guess that's how it's come a little bit more naturally to me. I've got a long way to go, certainly, but so I think, watching other people, having that conscious mind when you're looking at your social media, or, reading your emails, is that what they're doing? How did they do it? And analyzing it a little bit more.
Definitely. I would agree. And I think, like I said, going back to once you kind of see what the segues look like, I think like some of the examples, you think, oh, okay, this is how this could apply to my business or my call to action. And it doesn't have to, even when I say call to action, it doesn't even have to be necessarily a sales call to action. It can just be something that's engaging, that really, and the greatest part about it is not only you kind of rise above the noise when you're using these stories that are interesting, that are telling more about you. And at the same point, you're able to sell without really selling, because you kind of seamlessly go into what your point is and your call to action, where you're not going to be like everyone else out there who's like, buy my stuff, right? You're doing it in a much more, refined way, in my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The copy is making the sale for you, rather than you actually directly asking for the sale. Yeah, I really like that. We've talked a little bit about your email list, and clearly I am a very big advocate for email marketing. I think, I should have looked this up before I started, shouldn't I? But I think episode 9 and 10 was all about email marketing. But clearly email marketing is something that not everybody does. And one of the things that I really like what you're doing is taking people from social to email, which is something that I've been crowing about for a very long time. Do you have any tips or tricks for the audience that's listening about how you can take people from social media to an email list, and why they should be looking at doing that?
Oh, definitely. If I think most people don't realize there's so much fanfare over social media in general that we don't realize, or really think about the fact that a very small even in terms of just percentages, is it 2 to 5% of your followers see your social media posts? A low average open rate for email is 15%. A higher average is 30%. So just in terms of percentages, email marketing is so effective and truly not expensive. I mean, you can do it free for quite a long time once you get started. And with, at any point in time, this can all go away. Like, I don't think Instagram's going to go away, but I have a friend who lost her account. It got hacked, and her Instagram account, and she lost 10 years of her work on Instagram overnight and couldn't get anyone to help her, so not in fear tactics. It's just, we want to move people off social media. Everything that I preach about marketing is moving people off social media onto our websites and onto our email lists, where we own them. And not that we own them, but we own, the lists, that we have control over what happens over there. And when you start looking at the numbers, email marketing is, I believe it's the second most effective marketing out there. So definitely encourage everyone, if you haven't started a list, of what a huge priority it is. And I love using social. I'm an Instagram lady, so I love using Instagram to move people over. There's, tons of different ways that you can do this. You can mention your freebie in your caption as a solution to maybe a problem that you've proposed when you've agitated it. You can make the freebie a call to action some of the times. I love using Instagram stories, especially for getting people onto my email list. I always think in every part of marketing, but especially with this, like, what's the easiest way for someone to get onto my email list? Is it for them just to simply send me a direct message with their email and let me know, they're giving you permission and asking them for their email address? Sometimes I'll do a poll. Hey, do you want my new freebie? And if they say yes, I simply just follow up and say, hey, you said you wanted my freebie. If you give me your email address, I'll send it to you and I'll add you to my email list. I also love getting people over, and I will do mini trainings in my stories and say, hey, if you kind of, even like what I'm doing on this podcast today, if you want to learn more about how you can use segues in your emails and captions, go grab my free guide. So I'm always looking at it through, like, what can I mention? I make promotion of my freebie a huge priority every week. I'm promoting it at least once or twice a week and trying to move people and get them over to my email list. Amy Porterfield has a quote that says something, I might be misquoting it slightly, but the strength of your business is determined by the size of your email list. And I couldn't agree more. Once you have, and the thing about once people get over to your email list is that selling is so much more organic in an email a lot of the times than it is on social. It feels a lot more natural. You can use more story. It's an easy click over. So I use a combination of ways of getting people. But I think the one thing that you have to think about too is you have to ask, and you have to ask more often. We think, oh, we told people about this freebie already. I actually had someone in my Facebook group who said the other day, she's like, oh yeah, I think I had to hear you talk about this 4 or 5 times before I decided I needed it. Plus,
and
we
that's
don't know
probably a really short lead time, 4 or 5 times.
Yeah,
Like, they say,
agree.
what, 12 to 15 touch points these days?
And especially with how noisy it is. And I think too, we don't think about, my mentor Chris always says, like, how we don't realize how a person's problem might mature over time. So they might not need your freebie last week, but all of a sudden something has come up and your freebie is a solution to the answer. So growing your email list is definitely not being afraid to ask, and doing it probably more than we feel comfortable with in asking. And I think that goes for whether it's sales, our email list, whatever we're trying to promote, asking more often than we think. And I see it, and this even goes back to testimonials. I'm always asking people, in a respectful way, hey, will you give me a testimonial list? Hey, would you like to join my email list? And the other thing too, I would mention about getting people onto your email list is that when someone sends you a direct message or an email, I always ask permission if it's something private. But if someone's giving you a comment or direct messages, is social proofing the heck out of it. Anytime anyone pays me a compliment, I am constantly saying, hey, can I use this? Can I take a screenshot of this? And, I can mention you or not mention you, but so that's another great way. So not even just talking about it. In general, people believe other people's reviews. I think it's like 87%, 87% of the time, like, they would believe a friend. So when you start throwing social proof out there with people getting onto your email list, all of a sudden, people are like, hey, what am I missing here? What I even just the other day, someone sent me an email and said that, and I was very touched that my email actually brought tears to their eyes. And I was just like, wow, can I share this with, people and tell them what's going on? And I was able to use it as social proof. So I definitely think using a lot of social proof everywhere you can when it comes to your marketing, but even for your email list is huge.
Yeah, look, and I love just going back a little bit when you were talking about Facebook stories, Instagram stories, and how you use them to help build your list. Because I know, lots of people say to me, oh, but I don't have the swipe up function. I can't, how am I supposed to get leads if I haven't got the swipe up function, which is something you can get either through paying for an ad or if you've got more than 10,000 followers. But you've just given some perfect examples on how, you don't need the swipe up function. And quite frankly, the people that I know that have got it, they say it's not nearly as useful as what we who haven't got it think that it's going to be. And the other thing that I just wanted to say also, when you were talking about repeating yourself and talking about your freebie and that sort of thing, I know that my mentors have always said, if I'm sick of talking about something, then finally it's probably getting some traction, because it's just that 2 to 5% of people are hearing it. So if you're actually sick to death of talking about it, there's a fair chance that maybe the majority of your audience might have heard about it by then.
I completely agree. And I think it goes with so much of what we do. Like sometimes we feel like we're repeating ourselves, which we are. We just don't, we think everyone hears everything we're saying every time we say it. And that's really not the case. So,
No, we're really not that important.
yeah. And that's it. We're all busy in our own, we're all wrapped up in ourselves. And then we realize, oh yeah, people don't really care, right? They're paying attention to their own stuff.
That's right. Exactly.
But
Exactly. Beautiful. That was just, yeah, there's so many great tips in there about getting people to email us. And I couldn't agree more. Like, and I've got lots of stories just like you have with your friend who lost her Instagram account. Lots of stories of people whose businesses have disappeared overnight, and they've got no way of communicating and contacting with their ready-made audience again because it was purely on a platform that they didn't own.
And also, it's something too that I don't think it's talked about even on with is, if you have someone that you're kind of partnering with or that you walk alongside, like doing something like Instagram takeovers or simply asking someone, say, hey, oh my gosh, thank you. I'm so glad this freebie helped you. If you ever would like to consider sharing it with your audience, I'd be super grateful. And, we're afraid to ask sometimes. And I am right up there with you. And I've really had to take my ask up to the next level because it's truly the key, asking a lot more than we want to the difference. And I've grown my list. I didn't have a big list when I started, and with a couple of freebies that I've done since June or so, I think I've grown my list like over 800%. And that's just by, asking a lot and telling people a lot about it. So
yeah, and it's a bit like social media, though. It's not necessarily about the numbers. It's about the engagement that you get from those numbers. So even if you've got a small list, you can still have, really great success with that small list. You don't need, tens of thousands of people.
Oh no, and I have well less than that. I think too, what we don't really, what it's the two is that when you don't have a lot of people on your list is that you're able to spend a lot of time engaging, emailing back and forth, developing these relationships. And the relationship, I think, and I'm sure you would agree, is that's what it really comes down to. It's like that one person that you help today who tells another person about you tomorrow, who tells another person about you. When I look at marketing strategies, I look at it from all levels. And we don't take into account, I think, how big word of mouth marketing really is for our business. And so when you're able to spend time really investing into that one person, it can grow like wildfire. So
And if you're ever not sure how word of mouth marketing can be, how powerful it can be, do something wrong. and that shows you as soon as a company does something wrong, you can see the power of word of mouth because it just spreads like wildfire. Unfortunately, when people do things right, it doesn't quite come back as quickly.
I don't want that kind of I don't want to do something wrong, but it is.
It certainly does show you the power, though. It certainly shows you the power. Yeah, beautiful. Brenna, this has been brilliant. I have loved chatting with you, and you have just so much wisdom. Now, we've mentioned this freebie quite a bit, and my audience is probably like, come on, Jen, just tell me how I can get my hands on it. So how can someone get their hands on your little freebie all about Segues?
Yes, you can go to my website, thesocialrescue.com/segues, and I'll make sure you have it for the show notes. But it really is a great guide and breaks down everything that we talked about. And like I said, not only breaks down my own examples, but I have the best of the best copywriters on there where I was able to go in and look at theirs and really analyze how they do it. So it's a super valuable guide, and you need it. So it's a great one.
Yeah. And who doesn't want a step-by-step guide? That sounds awesome. Before we wrap up, do you have any final tips or tricks or anything that you wanted to say that perhaps we haven't got round to talking about on the podcast today?
Yeah, I think in closing, I just want to remind people, we talked a lot about stories, but really leaning into who you are and your quirks, it's funny when we kind of show these little glimpses of who we really are and maybe things we're afraid to share. When we share those things that we're nervous about, I feel I mean, to some level. But the more I share, like, the how frustrated I was feeling with my kids this morning, or, these quirky things about myself, all of a sudden I see such a reaction. So I think that's the beauty of all this, is that, and the beauty of personal branding is you can really lean into who you are. And when you do that, you attract your ideal clients, because you start attracting the people that want to work with you, even though you're quirky or you talk too much or whatever, whatever that thing is about you, they're okay with it because they kind of know it. You don't have to put on a show. So I think that would be my biggest tip, is to really lean into, and I know more and more so, I think it takes a little time to kind of get comfortable with who we are online. And but the more I do it, the more I see the response. And so I would just encourage everyone to do that.
Yeah, 100% agree. On both levels, that is definitely, you will attract the people that you like. Like attracts like. You will create that know, like, and trust factor so much faster if you are who you are. But it does take you a little while to get used to being you on social media or wherever that might be, and not trying to be someone that you're not. It shouldn't take us time to be that, but it really does.
Yes, I think every day, and especially too when online, there's so much room to compare, and
Mm.
see, attributes of others, or things that, that we might not have. And so, trying to stay, and this is preaching to myself, staying in my own lane, really concentrating on what I'm doing and what I bring to the table is huge. So
Yeah, absolutely. I think my very first podcast that I did, I edited out every breath, and then it was kind of like, pretty sure humans breathe, pretty sure it's going to be okay. So yes, just getting used to the quirkiness of yourself. Beautiful. Brenna, again, it's been brilliant. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for being my first international guest.
yay, thank you.
And I think there's just been a mountain of gold in here, and I can't wait to one day have you back on and we can chat more about email marketing.
That would be wonderful. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Take care. I really hope you enjoyed that episode as much as I did and really got some practical tips to take away from you. Of course, all the links that she talked about are in the show notes at I need to talk properly now. In the show notes at socialmediaandmarketing.com.au/60. So that's where you'll find all the different links that Brenna has talked about, as well as my 108 social media content creation ideas. I loved this episode, and I've learned so much from following Brenna, and I learned so much listening to her on the podcast today. So I'm super, super thankful that we could coordinate times across the seas to actually have a chat. I think it was actually my morning, like my Friday morning when this was done, and her Thursday afternoon the previous day. So of course, when I told my hubby I was doing this podcast interview with Brenna from way over in America, he said, well, make sure you tell her that Trump hasn't been impeached, because clearly we're in the future and she may not have heard that news because she's a day behind. And as I was telling her this and I saw her laugh, the thought just kind of went through my head. It's like, oh my gosh, I think my husband just told a dad joke and he's turning into one of those people. Anyway, bit of a light bulb moment there for both of us. So on that note, I think I should finish. And that is all for episode 60. I will be back next Thursday with another great episode that will help you really simplify your business in 2020. If you're enjoying this podcast, then maybe you could do me a favor or two. Perhaps subscribe to this podcast, as I have some exclusive content coming out really soon, and you'll only hear about it if you are subscribed to the podcast. And maybe you could share this episode with a friend, because another superstar business owner who's doing the daily grind might really appreciate someone making their business life a little bit simpler too. And of course, if you're still in the mood to give some February love, the love month of the year, then I would love for you to leave me a rating and possibly even a review. I read all of them and they're very, very heartwarming to read. But of course, I will see you next week on the podcast for episode 61. In the meantime, let's hang out on social, maybe in like-minded business owners. Otherwise, you can find me on Instagram and LinkedIn. But whatever you do, remember, my small business peeps, as my opening song says, there is no point in dreaming small.
Tell it like you feel it, say it proud, be true, and let us see you for the star that you are.